Negation, no less than doubt, assertion, or faith, requires the prior individuality of ideal terms, and to predicate non existence is, in that measure, to recognize essence. Being and the non existent here actually coincide, but not because both are nothing, but because both are being. If all existence could be abolished, all essence would resume its equable reign, and the absence of rude emphasis or blind exclusion would leave the infinite variety of being subsisting in peace. Although this fullness, even if an animal imagination could conceive it, might seem nothing to it, singly preoccupied as it must be with the flux of facts. The fact of non existence, then, is a natural alternative to that of existence, in many cases familiar, and in others feared or desired. Like every fact, it is contingent, coming and going at will, and leaving the eternal manifold of being exactly as it was. The non existent is accordingly not a bad name for the realm of essence, seen from the point of view of existence, but this point of view is adventitious. No essence is non existent intrinsically, since for all it contains or suggests it may very well exist, that is, some existence somewhere may for a time embody or manifest it. And even if this contingent occurrence were by chance perpetual, if, for instance, the essence of Euclidean space were frozen into an omnipresent, everlasting fact in nature, this persistent accident would not touch the status of mathematical space in its own realm, a status which is simply irrelevant to existence and not contrary to it. When the word nothing denotes non existence, it is fundamentally exclamatory. It expresses a feeling or an encounter rather than an idea. But the same word may be applied descriptively within the realm of essence to express non being or privation of essence. Nothing, then, means nothing of that sort. This mixture of privation distinguishes every essence, since in being itself it is necessarily no other. This is true even of the most comprehensive essences. A statue which includes the head excludes the special individuality of the same head reproduced in a bust. The different limits individuate not only the two material blocks but the two compositions. So the realm of essence, which is the full-length portrait of being, while it contains everything, drops in everything that isolation which makes it, when taken singly, seem the whole of being. It shatters the illusion of so many philosophers that they have found the only possible this or the only possible that. Indeed, the essential mixture of privation and all being is more uncompromisingly evident among essences than among existences, because existence, in admitting change, seems to have found a way of circumventing definition. The expedient is not successful save in so defining an existence that it may include successive phases, as a man's life does, but both the incidents and the life still depend for their being on their essential exclusions. The bachelor becoming a Benedict does not succeed in combining contraries. His singleness is gone. Any backward glances or truancies which he may indulge in only spoil and deepen his married state, in which he then feels henpecked or adulterous. Wisdom lies in voluntary finitude and a timely change of heart, until maturity, multiplying the inclusions up to the limit of natural faculty and moral harmony, afterwards gladly relinquishing zone after zone of vegetation and letting the snow peak of integrity rise to what height it may, becoming therefore does not unite being and privation more closely than being unites them in itself, even without change or existence. The full character of each essence is inevitably absent from every other essence, but this relative privation or absence of what is alien is the consequence of possessing a positive character. Had each term no private, indefinable, positive essence of its own, it could not justify those exclusions by which we define it, nor could it fill its appointed place and spread out its eternal intrinsic relations in the realm of essence. Pure being, like any other essence, is individual and distinguished by exclusions, for it excludes those limitations which render all other essences specific, somewhat as light, which fills up and dynamically constitutes all colors, nevertheless excludes each particular tint. This is far from being a reason for calling pure being a non-entity. The exclusion of all exclusions renders it infinite, not vacant. Vacancy and nothingness are terms applicable to existence, to which external relations are indispensable, and which at any moment may lapse, so that the place thereof knows it no more. They are meaningless in respect to essences, each of which, including pure being, is grounded in itself, and like a jewel or a star, shines all the brighter in isolation. Non-entity figures, indeed, in the realm of essence, because it is eternally impossible that anything there should be anything else. There are therefore always many things which anything is not. This non-entity is purely relative, and absolute non-entity would be self-contradictory. A false suggestion of discourse like the round square or the son of the barren woman. You cannot make a void of the realm of essence, as you so easily might of existence by waving a magic wand. Its indestructibility is not an accident, a stubborn matter of fact, like that of matter or of God. If you flatter yourself to abolish the realm of essence, you actually refer to it and reinstate it. If you deny it, you affirm it. The only negation of it which, in one sense, might be staunch, would be utter oblivion. But oblivion is subjective. It destroys nothing save the feeling or thought by which something was formerly recognized. All essences, therefore, partake of non-being, and pure being does so in an eminent degree, since it excludes the special forms of being proper to all the others. Bread partakes of non-being by not being meat, but food, or pure succulence, partakes of it doubly by not being either bread or meat specifically, yet it is the positive being in both insofar as they can sustain life. This pure essence of food is something positive, present in both, but limited to neither. Pure being, like all essences, rejects alien attributes by virtue of its positive character. When an infinite amount of entity has been denied of it, an infinite amount remains, compelling those denials. For the relative non-entity of all essences comes to them in so far as they exclude one another's characters, whereas the positive character of each is its share of being, and pure being, far from falling outside, is the absolute being in each. It is also the totality of all, when they are regarded not in their distinction, in which they form the realm of essence, but in their continuity and in their common latency within the essence of pure being itself, because we may say, though such language is figurative and inadequate, that pure being contains all essences within itself virtually or immanently, since though it cannot be any of them, it requires each of them to be what it is. The essence of food, for we are not talking of accidental facts, requires and includes all substances that could be turned into flesh and blood. The very non-exclusiveness or intensive infinity of pure being opens the way for all essences equally, and since each is something, cannot suffer any of them not to be. It denies each because it remembers all. In some sense, evidently, pure being is the supreme being. May it then be identified with God? I think that a religion is possible which should have pure being for its object, and that it might even become a popular cult. Brahmanism, as the initiated explain it, seems actually to be such a religion. In theory, it is entirely directed to identification with Brahma, that is, to eluding all finitude and existence. And the Mohammedans have a somewhat similar discipline, insofar as they abstain from all petitions and cultivate absolute conformity to the will of Allah. But human religion inevitably has another side. Prudence and piety require a wise man to study the ways of nature, to cleave to good and to eschew evil. Among Greeks and Romans, Jews and Christians, the object of worship is fundamentally a fostering power. God is a dominant force in nature, creating, thundering, issuing commandments sanctioned by rewards and punishments, and in his inner being, conceived to be a spirit, thinking, willing, loving, offended, and propitiated. A piety of this sort tends towards natural religion. Its superstitions, if it remains superstitious, are superstitions about fortune. Forces and events are its sole objects of reverence, and pure being is nothing to it. The very earnestness of the fact seeker compels him to reduce all myths as far as possible to literal science. Salvation he will identify with prosperity, eternity with survival, God with nature, or with some flattering purpose seeming to preside over human destinies. Divine commandments, or the will of God, will become in his lips merely an archaic phrase for the discoverable conditions of human well-being. Divine omniscience will become the truth of things, and divine love their friendliness and beauty. This makes a perfect religion for the irreligious. It means death to the spirit, but the spirit is not so easily killed. Action, like physical life, is free to perfect itself. if it can, in its own plane, adjusting itself absolutely to its conditions and carrying out all its impulses in harmony. This executive success, far from abolishing consciousness, will clarify it and make it musical. As the flux of matter, however self-contained and self-forgetful, cannot avoid casting an eternal shadow of its every phase upon the page of truth, so physical life cannot, by becoming very economical, avoid kindling all the more brightly the light of spirit. Natural existence has these spiritual extensions, whether it will or no, and in respect to the realization of pure being, ultimate and supremely difficult as it is to achieve aesthetically, instinctively it lies curiously near to the simple heart. Wherever there is peace, not the peace of death, but that which comes of liberation from constraint or distraction, there is a beginning of spirituality. Consciousness is nothing but intuition thwarted or achieved. Even distraction, until it disrupts consciousness, is tossed between intuitions. It can therefore turn into contemplation at any favorable moment by the mere suspension of animal will, anxiety, and care. Certainly the dark peace of the womb is far removed from the peace of the mountaintop. All clear articulation and self-assuming vision. Yet animal consciousness, when perfect, is not unspiritual. It may rest on nothing more recondite than a warm heart or a sound digestion, or the overwhelming magic of some absolute lure. Yet in its contemplative simplicity, in its disregard of all ambushed alternatives and material threats, it brings a foretaste of superhuman sympathies, which discipline might one day render disillusioned and habitual. When the object is pure, the spirit intent upon it is pure also. Hence that strange solace which so many millions find in their religious devotions, under some disguise of fable or image. Pure being is their sanctuary from the world and their liberation from themselves. Natural religion itself, when reflected upon, drives them in this direction. Force and fact are reverenced by the humanist because in them he finds the sources of his happiness. But as he watches and studies them, his reverence changes its hue. It becomes disinterested, sacrificial, liberating. Contemplation, even of destiny, neutralizes the will. The exuberance of nature, the disproportion between her wantonness and the clean interests of man, must give the humanist pause. He will find the world cruel, and he may react on its cruelty by asking himself what thoughtless pledge he has given to it, that he should be subject to these vain torments. His piety will still forbid him to rebel against fate. Rebellion would be a fresh form of vanity. There is no reason why man, or the transitory world in which he finds himself living, should have any prerogative amongst the realms of being. Traditional religion, for all its motherly coddling of human conceit, is not without a door towards the infinite. Theology must somehow reconcile the special mercies and graces coming to men from God with the immutability and eternity attributed to him. Nor is this an idle theoretical question, for of what ultimate use would the graces and mercies be if they did not lead men to share that immutability and eternity? In order to keep well and live long, hygiene is better than religion. If the fear of power, that is, of matter, was the beginning of wisdom for the natural man, the possession of power cannot be the end of wisdom for the spirit, and the spirit will not permanently worship in God a life inferior to that which it enjoys in itself. Power is a relation between existences, But where did existence and power come from, and how long will they last? There can be no safety in existence even for the gods. Safety in a living world means only forgetfulness of danger, because perhaps on the scale and in the habitat of that particular being, danger may not be imminent. True safety, spiritual peace, profound reconciliation with fate lie in another dimension. They spring from a new and superhuman direction of the affections. Piecemeal, amid the accidents of existence, ultimate good is attained whenever the senses and the heart are suddenly flooded by the intuition of those essences to which they were secretly addressed. Synthetically, for perfect recollection, it is realized by the contemplative intellect absorbed in pure being. This absorption, the unity or ecstasy of which mystics speak, has always been the goal of religious discipline in India, and wherever else the spiritual life has been seriously cultivated. This union is sacrificial, like that of the insect in its bridal flight. In it, the spirit loses its self-consciousness, the sense of its own or any other separable existence, and it loses this existence actually, because it cannot attain that ecstasy without dropping all connection with its body, that is, without dying. The body may subsist afterwards automatically, or perhaps generate new sensations and dreams, but these will not belong to the liberated spirit, which will have fled for good, fled out of existence altogether. It would seem, then, to unspiritual apprehension that the end of spiritual life is an end indeed. It is annihilation. This is the plain truth of the matter when spirit is regarded from the outside, psychologically and historically. Intuitions are placed and dated in the natural world by their occasions and their organs. An actual intuition of pure being, something absolutely infinite, is evidently irrelevant to any place or time, and disproportionate to any natural organ. We may safely say, therefore, that it cannot exist. Yet if we transfer our point of view to that of the spirit itself, and energize with it and by it, we shall see that intellectually and morally the spirit is fulfilled by the being of its object, not by its own existence. The soul, says Aristotle, is everything that it knows. But then we may add with equal truth, the soul is no longer itself, nor a soul at all. There lies the selfless nature of intellect, that existence is indifferent and imperceptible to it, either in other things or in itself, so that in losing its existence, if it has died victorious, it has lost what was no part of its prize, and in attaining its prize it has saved itself entire. Certainly a song that ends full in the quietening of all its impulses and the synthesis of all its notes comes to an end just as truly as if it had broken down in the middle. Both the soul saved and the soul lost ceased living in time, yet what a strange blindness there would be in giving to both the same evil name, and making no difference between dying defeated and being perfected in death. If in the act of union with pure being, the spirit drops the separate existence which it had before, it drops only what it wished to drop. Its separation consisted in not having yet attained perfect intuition, which must be without a natural center or personal perspectives. On attaining that intuition, the spirit abolishes itself by passing into that which it wished to find. Whether saved or lost, liberated or dissolved, the soul ceases to exist equally. This fact does not touch the interest of the spirit seeking liberation, whose office, even from the beginning, was worship, not thrift or self assertion. It is only when we have thoroughly renounced self assertion and thrift that we can begin to understand the spiritual view, which otherwise might seem to contradict what the psychologist knows about spirit. But there is no real contradiction. There is only a transference of exclusive attention from one plane of reality to another. Wherever spirit exists, it exists at some particular place and time by the operation of its natural organs, but wherever it thinks it regards only some essence, eternal and non-existent, a more or less ample manifestation of pure being. It is perfectly possible for any one who will consider the realms of being together to honor each in its place and to discard the scorn which those who have eyes for one only must needs pour upon the others. If then contemplation of pure being ever becomes the last secret of a religious life, it does so only when religion is transformed into a purely intellectual and sacrificial discipline. Positively religious or moral feelings then drop into their very small, very human places, where otherwise would be the transforming force, the sublimity, and sure finality of this insight. No fond eulogistic words such as high, deep, living, spiritual, true, patter any longer about it. They have lost their afflatus, and their contraries have lost their sting. It is not because the sage finds more in pure being than pure being itself that he aspires to union with it, but exactly because he does not find more. The fervent estimation in which he held it before he possessed it would render possession of it impossible if it continued afterwards. Like every other object, pure being appears under the form of the good only to those who are moving towards it, or are carried away from it against their will. Both creation and contemplation are vital processes which lend a relative value to their chosen ends, and when in a religious life the end happens to be union with pure being, this union becomes as precious and as legitimate as any other natural end could be to any spirit, but in no way more legitimate or more precious. Pure being itself is neither ruffled nor flattered by these opposite currents in the flux of existence. Its authority, if we figuratively assign authority to it, cannot be invoked by either party, but both parties, like everything actual or conceivable, have its connivance and silent toleration. The artist and the moralist may shudder at pure and infinite being, and may diversify and limit it in their own spheres to their heart's content, but understanding also has license to be. It, too, is free to choose a good and perhaps to realize it, and it may weave again all those diversities and contrasts into this seamless but many-colored garment which wraps Brahma in his slumber. There are no dispraise. There no praise or dispraise can intrude. All this flutter of spirits escapes from it unheeded and returns to it uncalled. Here, before leaving this subject, I beg the reader to allow me a personal confession, lest he should misunderstand the temper in which I approach these speculations. Every pursuit has a certain warmth about it, and sees its object in a golden light which, from that point of view, is a part of the thing discerned, and he who so sees it can hardly avoid using disparaging terms in regard to those who miss that revelation or are indifferent to it. So any artist in regard to his art, or any patriot in regard to his country, for the same reason, the intellectual or spiritual life, especially when cultivated in unison with some long-established religious tradition, sets up its precise standards and prizes them absolutely. Whatsoever satisfies other ambitions seems to it either a stepping stone in its own path, or else sheer vanity and illusion. Nevertheless, it would be senseless to demand insight of a stone. In the spiritual life there is nothing obligatory. Those who have spirit in them will live in the spirit, or will suffer horribly in the flesh. But this very insight into pure being and into the realm of essence shows that both are absolutely infinite, the one implicitly, the other explicitly. They therefore release the mind from any exclusive allegiance to this or that good. It is only by the most groundless and unstable of accidents that any such good has been set up, or any such world as that to which this good is relevant, and only to the merest blindness does this world or this good seem absolute or exclusive. Now it would be stupid in a blind man, because he was blind, to deny the greatness of a painter who was admittedly supreme in his art, or the sanctity of a saint, or the insight of some thoroughly trained, purged, and disinterested intellect. Yet that blind man would by no means be bound in his own person to begin for that reason to paint, to pray, or to go into the Indian wilderness and contemplate pure being. Humility in these respects is not incompatible with freedom. Let those excel who can in their rare vocations, and leave me in peace to cultivate my own garden. Much as I may admire and in a measure emulate spiritual minds, I am aware of following them non passibus aequis, and I think their ambition, though in some sense the most sublime open to man, is a very special one, beyond the powers and contrary to the virtues possible to most men. As for me, I frankly cleave to the Greeks, and not to the Indians, and I aspire to be a rational animal rather than a pure spirit. Preferences are matters of morals, and morals are a part of politics. It is for the statesman or the humanist to compare the functions of various classes in the state and the importance or timeliness of various arts. He must honor the poets as poets and the saints as saints, but on occasion he is not forbidden to banish them. Chapter 5. Complex Essences. By one of the uses or abuses of the word is, one thing is often said to be another. This absurdity, as a pure logician might think it, flows out of the natural relation of essences with things and serves clumsily to express it. A thing naturally has many appearances, lights, sounds, temperatures, perspectives, and it may conventionally have many names. Each of these essences, as it crosses the field of intuition, is verbally identified with that thing. But good sense, unless a sophistical attempt at accuracy trips up its honest intentions, will easily perceive that none of these names or appearances is the existing thing, nor are they the existing thing when added together, but still only a collection indefinitely variable and extensible of its names and appearances. The thing is a strand in the flux of matter which, apart from all appearances and names, passes at its own rate through a continuous series of states until that strand merges into others and the substance of it goes to form other things. So a man or other natural being has a material continuity from birth to death, apart from the sensations which he may desultorily cause in others or in himself, and apart from the names which he may receive. Loose logic, incident to such naming and recognition of things, runs over into human thinking even about essences, because these first attract attention as signs for things or as sensuous names, and it takes time and speculative faculty to discern their intrinsic nature. If 5 potatoes go to the pound, those 5 potatoes are said to be 1 pound of potatoes, and it is quite true that 5 and 1 are in this case alternate descriptions in different conventional terms for the same parcel of matter, yet conceived apart from that material signification. 1 is evidently not 5, nor is number weight, and when essences are envisaged directly in abstraction, as people say, from all that is irrelevant to them, nobody would be tempted to identify one essence with another, or any essence with any changeable thing. Why confuse obvious objects by trying to interpret or transform them at all, as if their entire and individual nature were not given in each instance from the beginning? If the obvious defies description, it does not require it. Only it happens that language and the other laborious instruments of life, being addressed to the medley of things, distract us from the obvious and render it ambiguous. We form the habit of asking what a thing is, a habit absurd if extended to essences. Essences do not need description, since they are descriptions already. Nevertheless, the attempt to describe certain essences instead of simply inspecting them has some justification and meets with some success. There are memorable ideas which we may wish to revive. Incidental means of reviving them may be at hand, since intuition has a physical basis determining the essence that shall appear. So written music is a means of reviving melodies. The phonograph is another, and even verbal descriptions and similes may not be useless in suggesting musical essences and distinguishing them clearly in their own category. Intuition is thought, and anything that clarifies thought enriches intuition. Thus artificially, by the innate phonography of the psyche, much that is not given at the moment may be adumbrated and felt to lie in a certain direction within predeterminate limits of character. The intuitions with which the psyche is pregnant would actually arise if the living process that would generate them could be carried a little further. So our convictions are big with eloquence and our passions with predestined objects, which even if never realized are a sure unconscious criterion for accepting or rejecting anything that may be pre-offered in their name. The most interesting essences, like the thoughts of ancient philosophers, may be at some remove. How should they be known in their absence except by description? The imaginative inquirer is reduced to retelling the circumstances or to specifying sundry qualities in which the intended object presumably differs from those within his ken, until he catches or thinks he catches a glimpse of the essence sought. An ulterior essence may thus be approached as a thing is approached, by laying siege to it and attempting to conquer it bit by bit. And the same uncertainty always hangs about the most confident success in such an endeavor, because although the mind possesses at the end the essence it possesses, it cannot know that this essence is the one intended, possessed elsewhere by an intuition numerically different and historically remote. The entire historical study of ideas, of which romantic idealism is so fond, is irrelevant to ideas. Interesting as it may be an improvised reconstruction of things past, and fascinating the learned illusion of living again the life of the dead, it distracts the mind from mastering whatever the past may have mastered. It inhibits pure intelligence and substitutes for it the pleasures of sympathetic fiction. Those ultimate visions are mist on which pure thought would rest, and which lend its only interest to rambling experience, and even experience itself is surveyed in a false perspective, created by the special frame which the present provides for it, the present always casual and new, so that ancient history needs to be rewritten from the beginning by each generation of romanticists. Indeed, the object of interest in such reconstructions is not a moral revelation, not the rediscovery of an essence formerly discerned or prized, but only the fact that people once entertained some such idea. And naturally the dates and the names of dead men become more important and are easier to determine than the truths or beauties which they may have known. Essences here, as in physics, serve only to supply names for divisions in the flux of matter, for after all this flux could not be distinguished into phases at all unless some essences were discerned in it. It is for this reason that minds fundamentally without loyalties and incapable or fearful of knowing themselves pursue subjects like the history of art or of culture. Illusion that they are interested in things beautiful or noble accompanies their purely material investigations, and they trace the genius of every school of life without understanding the life of any, like Enoch studying the physiology of love. The first precaution, therefore, which the description of a removed essence imposes is to discount the method of approach, the position and habit of the observer. He must beware of repeating here the error common and excusable in the perception of things, that of hypostasizing symbols and hastily identifying views with the objects viewed. He must not project, for instance, on a complex essence like Euclidean space, the emotional simplicity of a blue sky or a dark room, nor upon a simple essence like pure being, the miscellany of those natural facts or human ideas by which pure being may be manifested to him. The most complex approach will not complicate that which itself is simple. The setting will not carve the jewel, nor will the blank wonder of an eye, seeing only simple bulks, remove complexity from the intrinsically complex. In what sense can any essence be intrinsically complex, seeing that every essence has its eternal and indivisible unity? This question will answer itself if we ask another, namely, what is unity? Because if there is a unity incompatible with complexity, there is another essential to it. Pure unity is qualitative, like that of a scent or a note, or like that of pure being. Such unity is indivisible and defies analysis, but a pure quality may pervade a continuum. The scent may be diffused, the note prolonged, and pure being may be contemplated. The unity of this continuum is quantitative and merely specious or imputed. It subsists because by chance the component parts of it are not discriminated. A continuum offers an opportunity for variation and the interweaving of qualities, something impossible without a common medium or field. Quantity will then become order. It will display a form or system. The imputed or specious unity of the continuum will not be in the least jeopardized by this internal complexity. On the contrary, the complexity presupposes the unity. Otherwise, the elements would not figure in the same context or fall into those relations which knead them together into a particular compound. These elements would then remain separate simples, like colors and tubes. Before they can form any picture, a canvas or an eye must compose them into a complex essence, itself, like every essence, perfectly single and individual. Thus, a third sort of unity, that of order, system, or form, is presupposed in any actual complexity of being, and the doubt whether an indivisible and eternal essence can be complex dissolves in the fuller insight into what essence means. This complexity is not material. It is not the factual coexistence of elements themselves, self-centered and self-existent. It is the essential complexity of a form in which the relations of the parts are internal relations in the whole, so that both the total unity and the contrasting parts are pure essences. Every landscape seen as actually seen, not as confusedly supposed to exist semi-materially like a natural stage setting, is an eternal and indivisible unit. The least derogation from its complete essence substitutes a different essence for it. That spread of light, that precise emphasis of line, that mixture of suggestions are no material facts collected into an existing object. They form the very individuality of the composition momentarily intuited, which any one who would ever behold the same landscape, the same spiritually speaking, must evoke anew in its perfect identity. In most essences, complexity is obvious.